Hi, so we are inside the AWS Management Console, and today we are going to learn how to connect our EC2 to our DynamoDB, which is a NoSQL database managed service provided to us by AWS. So the first thing which we need to do is we need to configure a role, and to configure a role, we'll click on Services and search for IAM, that is Identity and Access Management. Now, after clicking on IAM, we will go to our roles, and we'll be clicking on Create Role. So role is basically a way of giving permissions to a service to access other AWS services. So because we are going to do this with EC2, we're going to select EC2 in the service and go to add permissions. Now since I want my role to have access to DynamoDB, I'm going to search for policies which grant me access to DynamoDB. And once I search for Dynamo, the first option that I see over here is Amazon DynamoDB full access. So I'm going to quickly select this and go on add tags. Since I do not have any tags to add, so I'm just going to skip this step and go to review. Now I'll have to name this role. I can just give it DynamoDB access for EC2. I'll click on create role, and now if everything goes okay, you can see over here that my role has been created, which has the permission to access DynamoDB. Now I'll quickly go to EC2 to launch an instance. Inside EC2, I will click on launch instance. I'll be using Amazon Linux 2 AMI, which is a part of the free tier, and I'm going to use t2.micro. Again, this comes under the free tier. Now in the configure instance page, I will have to go to IAM role and select DynamoDB access for EC2. If you do not select this IAM role, your specific instance will not have access to DynamoDB. Now I need to run a few a few lines like install Apache, install Git, yum update before I start my instance, because I do not want to do that manually. So I have an option of user data. I can just paste a shell script over here, and the shell script will be executed at the instance creation. I will be attaching a link to the GitHub repository for this video, and in this repository you can go to set commands to be executed at instance creation file, and here we have a set of commands that have to be executed. I'll just paste that up. I'll explain every bit of it. So yum update y is basically going to update your yum. Then you're going to install httpd, that is Apache, PHP and Git. You're going to start your Apache server by the command service httpd start. You're going to change the configuration of httpd to on, which means that when you restart your instance, your Apache will be, the state of Apache is going to be switched to on. Then we are going into var www.html, which is the root directory for your Apache, and then we are creating a file called test.php, in which we are displaying PHP info. We're calling the PHP info function. So basically what is going to happen is once the instance is created, I'll just be typing the IP address of the instance /test.php, and I should be able to see a test screen. So this will help me check if everything goes on correct. Now I will go to add storage. Since this is a Linux instance, 8 GB is the minimum required storage. I'm going to go with the general specification, that is general purpose SSD, because again it's covered in the free tier. Do not forget, if you uncheck this delete on termination, if you forget this step, your elastic block store volume will not be deleted. So just make sure that this is checked if you are doing it for a trial purpose, and in case you're in production and you want to have copies, like in case you terminate an instance and you still want to have copy of your elastic block store, you do not want your disk to get, your virtual hard drive to get corrupted or deleted, then you can just uncheck this option. We'll quickly go to add tags. Since I do not have a tag to be added at this point of time, I'll quickly go to configure security group. Inside security group, if you have an existing group, you can choose one. Since I do not have one, I will be creating one and calling it web server Linux. So in web server Linux, I have to by default enable SSH, because this is how I'll be gaining access to my instance. And along with that, since I am going to access this instance via PHP, that is over HTTP, I'll have to enable HTTP, and I'll have to keep the source as anywhere, which is I can practically access my HTTP from anywhere in the world. I'll go to review and launch. I'll check everything, I'll check the configuration which I have selected in the previous steps. So what we need to check over here is you need to check if SSH and HTTP both are enabled. HTTP has to be enabled over port 80 and SSH over port number 22. We're using T2.micro again, since if you are in the free tier, you're going to get 750 hours of T2.micro free for the first 12 months, and 750 hours is going to be given to you every month. And Amazon Linux 2 AMI is a version, it's a distribution of the operating system of Linux, which is under the free tier. So this is pretty much it. I'll just go click on launch. If you have a key pair, you can choose one, or since I have deleted my previous key pairs, I'll be creating a new key pair. Call this my EC2 key, and it's going to download a file called EC2-key.pem, and I'm quickly going to click on launch instance. So it should approximately take you about a minute to get your test page running. To check that, what you can do is you can just click on the IP address, paste it in the browser, and attach a /test.php. Once the instance is running, you will be able to see that the page is the page would load, but since the instance is still initializing, it will take you quite some time. And once that's done, we are going to SSH into our instance using putty, and for that we'll have to convert our PEM file to PPK file. So we'll need two softwares for that. For Windows users, you will need the first software is going to be PuttyGen. PuttyGen is going to generate a PPK file for you, that is a putty key file for you using the PEM, and the second is going to be putty itself, so where you're going to add the IP address and you're going to attach a PPK file and you're going to gain SSH access. For Macintosh users, you can just directly SSH, and for Linux users as well, you can just directly SSH with the PEM file provided to you by Amazon. So now, since I can see my instance is running, still the status checks are not done, so let me just wait for a few more seconds. Yeah, it is going to take, I think, a couple of more seconds. So if you do not just see this coming up to you immediately, you do not need to worry about that. Okay, and there it is. So now you can see, if I go to my instance /test.php, I can see an output, which means my PHP has been successfully installed. So that's how my instance, that's all the things which I need to do with my instance. Now the next step is where I will be connecting into my SSH using putty. Okay, so now we can see that I am inside my EC2. So the first thing which I need to do is I have got my PEM file. So the first thing which I am doing is I am going to launch puttygen.exe. I'm going to load my PEM file because I need to convert this to PPK. Now when you click on load, it is going to give you an option for PPK, so that's why it's not going to show you your file. You'll have to go to all files and select EC2. Now, since I have selected the key which I wanted to use, I am going to click on save private key, and I want it to be saved by the name of ec2-key.ppk, which is putty key format. And now, since I have the ppk file, I will be going into my putty, and to access, I am just going to copy in my IP address. I'm going to type in ec2-user @IP address. Port number is going to be 22. Inside SSH, I'm going to expand, click on auth. In auth, I have to select my PPK file, go back to my session. I can save the session for, if I have to log in back into my session at a later on point of time, so I can just call it EC2 session 1505. I'm going to save it, and now whenever I double click it, I'll have to accept the certificate. There you can see I am inside my EC2. So I can just straight away type sudo su, which gives me the root access, and I'll be going into cd var www html, and then I'll be typing ls. So I can see the test.php file. This file basically just has the PHP info function called in it. So let me just type nano test.php. Nano is basically a Linux editor, and there you can see we only have PHP info function called over here, and that's the output that you can see, which you just saw previously on the web browser as well. So now what I need to do is I need to install Composer. Composer is basically a package manager for PHP. In order to do that, I will again be shifting back to my repo. Now, one very common issue is that you will be out of memory when you try to install AWS SDK. So for that, what you need to do is you need to run a few steps, which is going to increase your swap partition. For those of you who do not know what swap is basically a property of Linux wherein you can use your memory, like your hard disk memory, as your virtual memory. So if in case you have less RAM and you want to increase your RAM temporarily, you want to use a part of your hard disk as your RAM. In that case, what you can do is you just need to run these few commands, and it's going to increase my RAM by 1 GB. It's basically not increasing my RAM, it's basically increasing the it's just taking 1 GB away from my hard disk, and it's going to utilize that for operations in case the memory of my RAM runs out. So now there I can see that my swap partition has been added. The next step is that I need to install Composer. So installing Composer is a few lines. These lines are very easy. So what you need to do is you need to get a file called composer setup.php from the Composer website. And then what you're going to do is you're going to check if the file is authentic by checking the hash value of the file. Post that, you are going to run the file, and once you're done installing, you're going to unlink it. Unlink is basically equivalent to your remove. It's going to remove the file out of the memory. And then what you're going to do is you are going to install AWS SDK PHP using the Composer which you have downloaded in the four lines. So I'm just going to copy all the commands, paste it. It will take approximately around a minute to execute, and be sure that you are inside your HTML. That is your Apache root directory. That's where www.html. And if things go on fine, you can just type in the ls command, and you can quickly check if you have a file called as vendor inside your folder, because that's the file which we will be using. So let me just quickly pause the video and come back to you once we are done installing. Okay, so here you can see it says that the file has been installed. Let me just quickly type ls, and there I can see a file called as vendor. Now this is a folder called as vendor, I'm sorry. So this folder is basically the folder which contains my AWS SDK for PHP. So let me just quickly go inside my vendor. And once I type in ls, I can see that I have a file called as autoload.php, and this is the file that I will be using inside my PHP scripts in order to connect with my DynamoDB instance. So let me just quickly go back. So now what I need to do is I need to run a PHP script for creating my tables. For that, what I'll do is I'll quickly go back to my repository. Inside the repository, I have something called as dbcreate.php. Now this is the file that we're going to use for creating the database. Now the steps over here are relatively simple. Let me just quickly guide you through these steps. When you're using a DynamoDB, what you need to do is, since I'm going to use it from EC2, I do not need to give in my secret key and my credentials in my code, because it's automatically going to authenticate via IAM. I'll just start by creating three tables. So I have started by creating a variable called table names, and it's an array. Inside the array, I have multiple element, and the first one is table name. So the first table that I'll be creating is going to be student list. And in this table, what I have to define what is going to be my partition key. Or for those of you who come from RDS background, or SQL background, you can understand your partition key as your primary key. So I have to define my primary key, which is student ID. and then I'm going to store the hash value because that's the location where my data is going to be stored. Now, no two items in a table can have the same partition key because it has to be unique for each and every item. Item is basically, you can consider it to be a row in your relational database, except that your item can have attributes. Each item can have different attributes as per your requirement. Then you can have a capping on the read write capacity units. So for this example, I've just kept it to be 6 and 5. You can change these values according to your requirements. The second table that I'll be creating is going to be student courses, and the third table which I am creating is student feedback. Now, along with student feedback, in the table student feedback, I have use a concept of a primary plus it's a concept of composite key, where I'm using a primary key and a sort key. So where let's talk about a scenario when you have to have a combination of two things as unique, like I can have multiple student names in a table, but a student name in a course, one student can enroll in one course just once. So if this is the scenario, in that case, I'm going to use my student name as my partition key, and I'm going to use the student course as my sort key. So this is going to be altogether, when both of them are combined, we call this the sort key. So in the end, what I'm going to do is, it is going to call the client is basically, you can just see on the top, it is basically a DynamoDB object, and we're going to call the function wait until. We're going to wait until the table is created, and once the table is created, we're going to give the output as the output will be table name created successfully, and it's going to run this code thrice, because the loop thrice, because uh, basically what you can see is we have 3 tables to be created. So that's how this is going to work out. Now what I'll do is, I'll quickly copy this code. I'll go back to my instance, and I'll be creating a file, nano create underscore tables.php. Inside this, I will be pasting my code. Now, one thing which you need to observe about my code is that inside the DynamoDB client, my region is AP South 1, which is the Mumbai region, Asia Pacific South 1. In case you want to have your, let's say your DynamoDB in some other instance, you can just change the value. I will just quickly save this. To save, I'm going to type in Control X, Y, and enter. And now when I type ls, I can see that a file called createtables.php has been created. I'll quickly execute this, and then we can see the output. Okay, so now I can see my create underscore tables.php file is available. So I'll just quickly go type in my instance IP address and type in create table. Okay, before I execute this, let me just quickly show you that my DynamoDB in Mumbai is totally empty. So I do not have any tables created over here. And I'm going to quickly go back to my file, create tables.php. If you followed all the steps correctly, you will be getting an output in approximately 10 seconds, because it's executing the script, and it does take some time to interact with DynamoDB. Okay, so there we go. Now when I go back and refresh, I can see that I have 3 tables created. And as I mentioned previously, that uh, out of 3 tables, 2 tables only had the partition key, that is the student courses and student list. The third table had a composite key, which is a combination of a partition key and a sort key. And for this example, we had kept the read capacity as 6 for all the tables and write capacity as 5. You can change this as per your requirements. Now we will learn how to add data to this DynamoDB. So let me just quickly go back to my repo, and in the repository you can see a file called as db@data.php. Now adding data in DynamoDB is relatively simple, it's not that tough. I'll be adding simultaneously into 3 tables. That's why I am going to again have an array. And what I'm going to do is, I am going to use the put request. Put is basically a method supported by DynamoDB, and this is what is used for adding an item. So and you can add multiple items in a table. So you can just have a look at the example. So what I'm doing over here is I have to definitely mention the student ID, because that is the partition key. If you do not enter the partition key, that is like, you cannot have it as blank, because this is the key on which it is going to store your data. This is like the main key. And then attributes can totally vary. So you can see over here I have a student name, student locations, courses enrolled, and the second item and the third item. So basically this snippet is going to, you know from here to here, it's going to create 3 items inside my table, and the name of the table is student list. Post this, I will be adding like a few items inside my student courses, and these are 2 items. And then I'll be adding a single item inside my student feedback. So let me just quickly copy this code. I'll go back to my instance, and now I will create a file. I'm going to name this nano add underscore data dot php. I'm just going to paste this. Again, you need to be very careful that you are inside the correct region. Your region should be the same one as in the previous file. So I'll quickly save it by pressing Ctrl X, Y and enter. And now when I type in ls, you can see that I do have a file called as adddata.php. So, and just to show you, my DynamoDB tables do not have any items at the moment. Now what I'll do is I'll call add underscore data.php, and there you see creation of tables was slightly longer, but then adding data is not that long. It's quite fast. Now when you go back to your tables, click on one of the tables, you can see your data has been added over here. Same is the case with the student list and your student feedback. So this is pretty much it about how can you connect your EC2 instance to your DynamoDB.